There was one Bible verse that really jumped out at me this week, and that was Matthew 11:28. Jesus saying, "Come to me, all you who are weary and carrying heavy burdens, and I will give you rest." This verse speaks to me personally and to many in our community and congregation. I know I have been really tired and weary physically for many months due to sleep apnea. I was finally diagnosed in May and received a sleep apnea machine last month in June and noticed immediately a difference when I began to use that machine. My body didn't feel so weary anymore, but the sleep apnea machine didn't cure all my weariness. There's been a lot of grief and emotional weariness too. Helen Hagelin's funeral tomorrow will be the 10th funeral I've presided at this year. That's 10 families in this area, 9 with New Hope and 1 through Perry, that I did for Kelly when she was sick, who are grieving the recent death of loved ones. There's a lot of weariness, heavy burdens being carried by many. Physical weariness from health problems, emotional weariness from grief, weariness from worries about health and well-being of friends and family. The weariness seems to ripple throughout our daily lives, not only in matters of health and wellness, but weariness from economic worries, weariness from division and ineffectiveness from our state and local governments, national too. And then there's the weariness from our worries over the future of the church as we knew it. Weariness that has caused some to give up on the church as a source where faith might be nourished. With all this weariness in our bodies, our weary souls, our weary lives, Jesus' words are so attractive. "Come to me, all you that are weary and carrying heavy burdens, and I will give you rest." Let's dwell in that promise for a few minutes and just think about, imagine laying all those burdens, all that weariness at the feet of Jesus. There's a good picture of Jesus. Let's just imagine all that. Take a moment. Maybe take a few deep breaths and just lay it all down. Of course, relieving us of these weary burdens isn't all Jesus does. Jesus goes on to say, "Take up my yoke upon you and learn from me, for I am gentle and humble in heart, and you will find rest for your souls. For my yoke is easy and my burden is light." Sounds good, doesn't it? But did you notice what Jesus is really saying? Jesus' ideal rest for the weary involves work. A yoke is an instrument of work. It's placed on the oxen so the oxen can carry the burdens. And Jesus says, "Take up my yoke." So since we are to be yoked together with Jesus, Jesus is alongside of us. In fact, those are Jesus' last words in the Gospel of Matthew. "Remember, I am with you always." So there we are, Jesus alongside of us. Rest for our souls means an exchange of burdens. We exchange all the burdens of the world for burdens that Jesus gives. I wonder if many people who are leaving the church missed an important detail. Jesus is not adding to our burdens. Jesus is not giving us just yet one more thing that we already have to do with all the long list of things to do. Instead, Jesus is exchanging burdens, lightening the load, not by giving us different burdens, but by also walking alongside of us, being with us, even when it seems like we're alone. He's still there. When it comes to Jesus, we always need to check our assumptions and our desires. Jesus' invitation to lay down our burdens is not an invitation to an everlasting vacation. Yes, it is an invitation to Sabbath rest, and it is perfect rest for our souls. But Jesus is always opening our eyes and hearts to more. It's interesting that the very next verses in Matthew are about Pharisees criticizing Jesus' disciples for working on the Sabbath. So here he is about rest and yoke, and there's something yet about the burden, and then right after that, there's Sabbath and working together. The Pharisees were criticizing the disciples for working, and what they were doing is just simply walking through the fields, and because they were hungry, they were plucking up the grain and munching on the grain, which was considered to be work on the Sabbath. It's hard to understand because sometimes Jesus leads us to do things that are outside of what our religious expectations and norms have led us to do. Looking back at the gospel, reading from Matthew today, we see that Jesus is pointing out that people do not always understand who he is. I really liked how one of the scholars I read interpreted these verses, so allow me just to quote directly from him because I thought he just got a really neat perspective on it. It's David Lose wrote, in this scene from Matthew, John the Baptist comes along and he didn't measure up. He didn't conform, that is, to what the folks present think he should be like. He's too reclusive, too ascetic, a loner, too somber, serious. He should eat and drink more. Then Jesus comes along and he's, well, too much the opposite. He drinks and eats too much and with the wrong kind of people. So maybe we should call it the Goldilocks syndrome. Never quite being satisfied. John, and the God John represents, is too severe, while Jesus, and the God Jesus represents, is just too accepting. We like our religious leaders to be just right, which pretty much means just like us. But here's the thing. If God were just like us, who would save us? I just couldn't say it better myself. I thought, oh, that's really cool. God comes and shows us where we least expect God to be, in order to shake us up, in order to call what we thought we knew for sure into question, in order to surprise us by being so different than what we expected, and yet precisely what we need. God's the one who bears our burdens, shows up in our need, comes alongside of us. And nothing demonstrates that more than the cross. What we talked about in the children's sermon. God embraces our life in Jesus to demonstrate God's profound love for us. And nothing can stop it. Not even death. But it's not necessarily what we want. We may prefer a God who takes away our problems, but rather God helps us cope with them. We may want a God that eliminates challenges, but God helps us, equips us for them. And we may prefer a God who defeats all our opponents, but God guides us to make peace with them. Again, it's not usually what we want, but it's pretty much exactly what we need. God always shows up where we least expect God to be, in the need of our neighbors, in a person that looks nothing like you, in a person who believes and acts differently than you do, in someone that's totally younger or totally older. And in all these circumstances, our call is the same. To care for them, to meet them where they are, to accept them as we're able. It's not easy work. That's the work Jesus gives us as his disciples. And we discover God in Jesus is already there, waiting for us, encouraging us, forgiving us, bearing us up, which is what makes the burden light. The yoke is not just easy, but in these terms, joyful also. Amen.